As soon as I finished gathering data on the Core i7-2600, I swapped it out for the Core i5-2400. I was wondering, would the i5 still be usable these days? Or is the 20% performance penalty due to lack of hyperthreading enough to turn me away from it? Now, Intel's own webpage has all the parameters of the i5-2400. Besides the lack of hyperthreading and the lower frequencies, it may be that the size of the cache, 6 MB for the i5 compared to 8 MB for the i7, will also impact the performance. The GigASUS rendering test might shed some light there, and will present its conclusions after the gaming results. I used the same test system as before, so I'll only briefly mention the B75 motherboard from Gigabyte, the 16 GB of DDR3 running at 1333 MHz, and the GTX 970 video card used. That being said, onto the gaming, and we start off with Marvel Rivals. Tested at 720 resolution, 30% render scale and low settings, it got 85 FPS on average and 48 FPS for the 1% lows when running on the i5-2400. While the average is fine, the 1% lows might be a bit too much to stomach for the more competitive players. Would I play Cyberpunk 2077 with an i5-2400? Yes. At 720 resolution, low settings and FSR set to performance, the average FPS is fine at 59 FPS. The 1% lows at 28 is a bit lower than what I aim for a single player, but still fine for me. The 0.1% however do indicate a bit of stuttering. Again, I'm used to playing single player titles at low FPS, but I can understand why this might not be for everyone. Fortnite shows some signs that the i5-2400 is no longer cutting it. The average FPS at 720 resolution and performance mode is close to 100, but more aggravating, the 1% lows doesn't even make it into the teens. And while others coined the term Stutternite, the game will play just fine on newer CPUs. Fortunately, Rainbow Six Siege is still playable on the old Sandy Bridge quad-core. At 720 resolution and 50% render scale, the CPU averaged close to 150 FPS, and the 1% lows managed to stay above 100. Even the 0.1% in the mid-90s is quite nice. Unfortunately, Apex Legends behaves more like Fortnite. At 720 resolution and low settings, the average FPS was fine at 124. But the 1% lows, those 1% lows, jeez. 39 is just not going to cut it. Just like Fortnite, Apex Legends ran pretty bad. At 720 resolution and low settings, Overwatch 2 ran quite fine. I swear I'm not trying to do a hot one cold one type of thing. The i5-2400 averaged 394 FPS. The 1% lows stayed at a comfortable value of 214. This game will play fine. Counter-Strike 2 however will not. I did my test run at 720 resolution and low settings. The average FPS of 87 might have you think that the CPU has it in the bag. But the 1% lows is just 44 and the 0.1% is 9. Overall, the experience was frustrating, with chunks of relatively smooth gameplay alternating with annoying stutters. Things did not change much in DOTA 2. The CPU was tested in a match replay at 1080 resolution and low settings, with the rendering scale set back to 100%. The average FPS came out at 61, and the 1% lows failed to go even above 20. Robocop was tested at 1024 by 768, 33% resolution scale and low settings. This way the bottleneck is shifted squarely onto the CPU, and the i5-2400 managed an average of 65 FPS. The 1% lows were in the mid-40s, which is quite fine for this title. And knowing the performance of the i7-2600 in the finals, I did not dare run the game using the 2400. Last year's results were pretty bad already, so I decided to not punish with my poor performance the other two players that would end up teaming with me. Despite the benchmark for Shadow of the Tomb Raider being quite CPU sensitive, the i5-2400 is able to run the game. At 720 resolution and low settings, the average FPS reached mid-70s and the 1% lows 43 FPS. This is fine for a slower paced stealth game. Borderlands 3 will run acceptably on the i5-2400. I ran the canned benchmark at 720 resolution and low settings. The average FPS came in at 76 and the 1% lows at 50. This is a single player title and the numbers for these two performance metrics should be fine. Control is the last title tested on the i5-2400. At 960 by 540 resolution and low settings, the run between ventilation and the NCP reactor got an average of 111 FPS. The 1% loss of 37 is, in theory, fine for single player. But the only way you would get 30s for the 1% lows and over 100 for the average is if you have a pretty low 0.1% lows. the experience is somewhat manageable. For productivity, I use a video compression test. The amount of time needed to do the final rendering for the GigASUS R9 is then multiplied with the number of cores and the average frequency to obtain the number of clock cycles needed to finish the given fixed work. In the case of the i5-2400, the 44 minutes needed to finish translate into a bit over 33,000 trillion clock cycles. This is 10% more than what the i7-2600 needed when running with hyperthreading turned off. Considering that both CPUs are on the same architecture, the difference can then be attributed to the extra cache that the i7 comes with. The i7-2600 pointed out that Sandy Bridge is starting to struggle with even some of the more recent eSport titles. While the performance in Counter-Strike 2 was borderline usable, the finals ran lackluster. The i5-2400 runs at about 80% of that, and while fine for some of the older games, the performance in more and more of the newer titles will fall into the stuttery mess category. One might claim that the performance in Fortnite or Apex Legends may be one-offs, due to some background tasks kicking up at the wrong time. If that's what you think, well, good luck with controlling when those background tasks get launched on the non-hyper-threaded quad-core. Sure, older games like Paladins, Rogue Company or Splitgate will run just fine on it, but the community for these is only going to dwindle. Should you buy one in 2025? Probably not if your main interest is gaming. But I needed one for office work for a buddy of mine. It did the job fine, and with some casual gaming possible, I could see the appeal for a 20 USD motherboard CPU cooler combo, or for a less than 10 USD CPU. And unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to see it at lower prices than that. Nobody's going to bother to list one for sale, never mind shipping it. Anyway, enough for now on the 2400, no point in turning it into the L-Cheat. Thanks for watching, I hope you liked.